Welcome everyone to our episode 67 of our podcast Cultivating a New Generation. In today's episode, we are going to talk about shaping your identity by being the observer. So we are going to go beyond the place of being a protagonist. We are going to be the observer. We are going to be the director, the editor of our own movie and use it to design a new identity to pursue the things that we really want and not the things that can be assigned due to the noise or to the things that many times we follow just as a pattern. So to speak about this topic, I used the article of Lin from 2020, The Experience of Being Oneself in Memory, Exploring Sense of Identity via Observer Memory, from the journal Review of Philosophy and Psychology. So, without further ado, let's go into the deep questioning of how our memory and space-time is working for us and not against us. Memory and the self have long been seen as intricately connected, while most philosophical and psychological studies have focused on how memory constitutes our narrative, self, or personal identity. The journal and the experience and the research aims to explore the topic of our sense of identity or self-continuity in memory. The sense of identity refers to our experience of being the same person as the protagonist in the memory or the remembered subject during recollection. For example, when recalling being at a family reunion, there is a protagonist interacting with other family members in the memory that you experience as yourself. While you are remembering these kind of experiences, you are able to witness yourself and see how was that experience and use that information to see what were the lessons, what were the things that most attach to your own identity, and what are the emotions that you are experiencing while remembering. Other investigators, Tulbin in 1985, characterized episodic memory with mental time travel to enable oneself to mentally travel through time. Other researchers in 1997, Sudendorf and Corvallis, tell that one is required to be able to construct an episodic simulation of counterfactual world that includes a subject in the past, as well as to experience that simulated subject as the same person as oneself. Studying the sense of identity within this process is key to understanding one of the core elements of mental time travel. So it is just like those movies where they can go back in time and see themselves performing the things. And as we have seen in those movies, supposedly you are not supposed to meet with your one self of the past. But in these kind of experiences, what we are doing is becoming the observer without the emotions. So this kind of exercises and processing works a lot for therapy and through working with trauma experiences. As mental time travel can be found in both remembering and prospection, so that is past or future, the issue of identification exists not only in studies on memory, but also in those on future thinking, counterfactual thinking, imagining, and dreaming. So all of those are the experiences where we uh, move through time without noticing that we are also reflecting, detaching from emotions, and constructing a new, stronger identity. The phenomena of the observer memory will be explored throughout this research for the identification and consider the potential accounts that it takes for the labeling that you are doing throughout your experiences. When remembering a past event or imagining a future one, episodic simulation can be formed from either a field of an observer perspective or from being the protagonist. From a field perspective, the event is experienced as if the world is being seen through one's own eyes. So you are the protagonist. You are just moving in the field of the experience. Alternatively, from an observer perspective, one views the world and oneself from an external visual spatial perspective. Is like being the narrator of your life, is being the editor, is watching the movie and seeing everything that is happening, but not um, living the emotions. When you are the protagonist, you can re-experience many of the emotions. When you are the observer, you detach from the emotional perspective. Observer memory helps elucidate the issue by providing a case in which the perspectival dimension is dissociated from the embodied dimension. So that's what I was explaining. When we are watching ourselves, we are not feeling the emotions in the sense that we identify with them. When we are the protagonist and we just remember certain situations, we can be shaken and we can re-experience those trauma or emotions. And that's how we are noticing that we haven't overcome certain situations. Every episodic memory entails a special sense of self, which allows one to mentally travel in time. Not only are there a remembering subject and a remember one, or the protagonist of the given episode of memory, but the sense of identity is also present. The remembering and the remembered are experienced as the same person. So it is just choosing who are you going to be when you time travel. Are you going to witness yourself and try to pick up some pieces of the story, try to create a more objective memory of what happened, and try to see also the emotions of other people that probably cause you damage? Or are you going to be the protagonist just trying to remember usually a positive experience? The remembering and the remember are experienced as the same person. What gives rise to such experience? What phenomenal properties constitute the sense of identity in episodic memory? The issue of identification concerns the question of how a subject experiences the protagonist in episodic memory as the same person. The issue of identification that is of interest here is to be distinguished from an understanding of identification in terms of a mental action. While both understandings relate to how the identification between the remembering subject and the protagonist arises, the latter presupposes the involvement of some kind of mental action that the subject undertakes in order to give rise to such relationship between the rememberer and the remembered. That is, to identify with the protagonist in episodic memory requires the subject to actively do something. Usually, these kind of um, remember experiences happens also when you are in a hypnosis. That's why. So, so that you can cope with the possible emotions that you are going to re-experience on the surface of those big trauma events. On the other hand, for the former experience where you are the observer, there is no presupposition. The identification can stem either from something that happens to the subject or something that the subject does. As I will point out in this research, the question of identification in terms of some kind of mental action can be misleading. Why? Because many times we are adding details to those memories, and many of those details or many of those things that we are adding or subtracting from the memory are not accurate, because our brain is constructing an image in our own perspective. So that's what it can be misleading. Remembering via the observer perspective visualizes an event from an external vantage point. Observer perspectives are located outside one simulated body and can vary across spatial locations, and one may be able to see one's own simulated body in a way that is impossible in perception. Let us illustrate this issue with identification. First, let's, for example, recall a social event in the past, such as the last time you had a drink with your friends. Make sure that you recall the event from a field perspective. A field perspective, remember, that is just going back to the place and reliving the situation. How do you experience the protagonist as yourself now? How is this simulated subject among the other people simulated in your memory identified? These questions seem rather easy since you re-experience from the vantage point of your simulated eyes. Similar to the original experience during the encoding, you may also experience yourself owning and being located within a simulated body that is similar to your body in the past. The egocentric center of the episodic simulation coincides with your simulated body's location. So you are trying to go back, and this is really amazing how our brain can do that. You literally go back to the experience and you are yourself, but with many of the information that you now have, and you are trying to relive the experience. And by doing that, you can even see what were the things that probably you could have done much better in that experience. Now, we are going to play another game. Switch your perspective to recall the same event from an observer perspective. Now you are the narrator of the experience, you are from above, and you are watching yourself. Again, several people are simulated in your episodic recollection, but this time they are visualized from a perspective originating outside of one's simulated body. And one of the people seen is you. In the cases that involve an observer perspective, the answer to the issue of identification becomes less straightforward, as the perspective and visualization of the scene are different from the original experience. Now, as you play the narrator, as you probably are coming from another place where you are not yourself, then you can see other things that probably in those moments you were not even paying attention. Then what you are going to do is to compare both experiences, the experience of the observer and the experience of being, again, yourself, spotting in the group and probably in a picture also. Are the experiences of identification different in these two cases? Write down what did you feel in each of them. How did you feel in terms of being yourself again in that experience? And what kind of emotions were passing through your body now? And write down what happened when you were the observer. What kind of things did you notice that probably that night you didn't pay attention to them? And if they are different, how are they different? This comparison will help to highlight some crucial characteristics of the identification in memory. However, if we take the observer memory into consideration, which is the scenario where you are coming from another place, the extrinsic property is unlikely to be a perspective feature. The latter is distorted in the observer memory, since by definition, in an observer memory, a new perspective is adopted in a place of the perspective of perception. Yet, even in observer memory, identification remains. Therefore, the extrinsic property in the content of memory that is inherited from perception and allows identification with oneself cannot be the perspectival features. So what is this reflection talking about in the research? This is an exercise that is extremely helpful in terms of giving us such deep information of how did we react in those kind of experiences and what could we have done better, what kind of feelings were we experiencing, because remember that we are the observer. So now we are watching if we did something that we regret, or if we try to understand the situation, we are now able to not engage with emotion and to see the things in a more objective way. And that is going to give you a lot of information. It is just like when those nights that you go out, you drink, and next day you don't remember a lot of things. But the coming days, you are recovering the memory of the things that you did, and you start seeing things that you sometimes could not believe that you did or say those things or said those things. So this is how we can start the identification from the situations, from the emotions, and also constructing a new type of identity. Can the extrinsic feature be the relational property of the remembered self and the environment? This feature of being outside is preserved in both the field and the observer perspective memory, as long as each of them is true. Nevertheless, some kind of false memory can be a counterexample. It can happen that on the one hand, we either mistakenly remember an event that has never happened or distort the mnemonic content dramatically. So that's the memory that you are distorting everything and reconstructing a new situation. And on the other hand, there is no problem experiencing the protagonist as oneself. So if the memory is recalled with a field perspective, this is a case of identification without the given relational property, the proper simulation of the relationship between the bodily self and the environment that makes memory true. For instance, in a fabricated memory of a traumatic event resulting from the suggestions of psychotherapists, the relational feature of the bodily self and others or the environment is distorted, but identification remains, and one can even feel a strong sense of identity when recalling. In this case, one fails to preserve the relational feature, but still experiences the identification. So what this is trying to say is that we are reliving many of the emotions, We are reliving many of the things that we remember that we did in that certain occasion, but what we are not doing in this kind of recalling is that we are not paying attention too much about the surroundings and about for example, the music, the things that have to do with other people. We are just trying to relive how we felt. Furthermore, there is one observing perspective in the observer memory, rarely explicit in conscious experience. Is the experience of seeing really absent in observer memory? It is unclear if everyone shares the same introspective intuition. The observing perspective may be more explicit, and the embodied dimension may manifest in a weaker way in some cases of the observer memory, because we are not being, in this case, we are not being ourselves, we are being the narrator or the spectator. For instance, adopting an observer perspective is considered of a kind of self-distancing, which refers to a mechanism that allows subjects to analyze their past experiences from a self-distance perspective instead of an immersive perspective. When using that strategy to recall a traumatic experience, not only is the observing perspective, emphasized, the relation between the observing self and the simulated protagonist is also explicitly attended to. So this is what really can work for us to know more about the actions that we are performing, to know more how can we improve in terms of evolving our identity and not doing the same thing that we were doing probably 1 year, 2 years, 5 years ago. Trying to see what kind of things, what kind of behaviors, what kind of emotions, what kind of, usually we are looking for toxic situations. We can clean from those experiences, from playing this observer mode, and start reconstructing and rebuilding a new identity. And we have to have an intention for that new identity, and we should have a visualization of the kind of people or the kind of person that we want to be. Before and after remembering, there are also triggering mental events. The perceptual experience of seeing an old photo, as well as the following mental events, considering calling an old friend, particularly in a situation in which we recall for certain task, searching for a solution or a better option. Our memory, perception, and action work together to accomplish the current or the future task. It is more aligned to recent views that the function of memory is for now and the future. This is very helpful when you are stuck in a problem that you have to solve and you have done pretty much everything that you are supposed to do, and you just need some space. You just need some space to witness the problem from another perspective. Usually that's when you go out and walk, when you do some exercise, when you take a nap, when you sleep for a night. And those are the times when you are going to time travel in the situation and see it from another perspective and find out the new ideas and solutions. That's using your intuition power also. The purposes of such flexibility can be diverse. I suggest that adopting an observer perspective can serve the function of acquiring knowledge about oneself, as we mentioned, that is only available from other perspectives. The knowledge can be spatial information, for example, one's location in a group, social information, what do I look like in the eyes of others? So, how are other people witnessing the situation? Or autobiographical information, thinking about one's past or future self. This is the self-simulation view that proposes that the identification with the protagonist in episodic memory arises from the process of self-simulation. A special construction of this episodic simulation creates a simulated world with oneself embedded in it. This sounds too futuristic. This sounds too a little bit at sometimes complex, but it is what we do every time we have a recalling experience. Now we are doing it with a purpose. Now we are trying to find something, either how to witness a situation that we had a trauma, we had a very strong emotion experience, or we are trying to witness the situation and the environment and the relationships with other people to try to recall and try to assemble the things that happen when trying to find out the real truth. So that's what our memory is capable of doing. And we also do this when we are children using the imagination. But this is a very powerful tool that we can use for visualizing your future self and trying to see the life that you are going to live in the future. And this is going to help you to see if you are following the path that you want. This is going to help you to also raise more questions about the things that you are doing in the present moment. And if those things, either your job, either the relationship, either the place where you live, whatever it is where you are supposed to be, or you need to take action in any of those areas of your life. And this is what happens when you also have a very strong goal, objective, vision in the future, and you align some kind of features, kind of experiences, kind of visual boards that people construct so that they remind themselves that they are pursuing certain kind of objective or goal. This is the power of giving your brain the new pathway that it has to follow, and also cleaning many of the past experiences from what you have lived, and also knowing more about yourself. Why did you act in certain ways in the past, and how you are not going to be in the same situations in the future. So this is how becoming an observer can reshape your identity and make you very powerful in terms of having a growth mindset instead of being stuck in certain situations and just seeing your life as if it hasn't changed. So I hope that with this reflection and this kind of research in terms of how we can time travel at any moment in time, and we can extract a lot of information from those situations, will work for you and not against you. You can heal traumas, you can detach from emotions, you can visualize yourself in the future, you can understand things that you were doing, patterns that you were following, and try to finally cut them off, and you can create a new identity. I think that that's the most important thing. And for this, first, try to define the identity, the values that you want to have for your future self. So I hope that this episode and this reflection like you. And if you think that is going to be helpful for people, please just let me share with this episode the information for all of them. Also, if you want, subscribe to the channel and give me your comments about these kind of episodes and reflections, if you like them, if they are helpful for you, or what do you want to watch in the future for this podcast. Thank you very much for your attention. Have a wonderful day, night, or afternoon, and we will listen to each other on our next episode. Bye.